A single portrait, hung in a ceremonial corridor of the palace, had stood undisturbed for years. But in the quiet hours of a tense morning, orders were issued, discreet yet final. Princess Catherine had made a decision. Camilla's image would no longer watch over this sacred royal space. What changed? And why now? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The decision came like a whisper cloaked in steel. No announcement, no meeting, just a directive passed down through a senior aide who delivered it with the kind of urgency that betrayed its significance. Camilla's portrait, once proudly unveiled as a post-coronation symbol of continuity, was to be removed from its place just 3 paces away from Queen Elizabeth II's towering likeness. The symbolism of its position so close to the late Queen had always been deliberate, a quiet assertion that Camilla belonged. That she was accepted, that her presence was not just tolerated but embraced by the institution. But over time, something shifted. A growing unease began to settle in the palace corridors. Whispers about Catherine's strained expression during a recent walkthrough didn't go unnoticed by the seasoned staff who'd learned to read silences like headlines. She had paused near the portrait but said nothing. Still, her eyes lingered, cold and distant. The aides beside her exchanged glances. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. A storm was brewing beneath her calm exterior. What the public couldn't see was the layered tension behind the palace walls, how the quiet war of glances, positioning, and protocol had escalated in recent months. Catherine, who had long remained composed and diplomatic, had reached a limit. Sources close to her inner circle described the moment as controlled defiance. There had been no tantrum, no confrontation, only a line drawn, invisible but irreversible. Camilla's camp, blindsided, erupted in quiet fury. How could such a decision be made without consultation? Some viewed it as an insult. Others saw it as something more dangerous, a warning, a subtle but definitive sign that the tides of power were shifting. For those paying attention, this wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a reclaiming of space, of legacy, of narrative. In the silence that followed the order, the palace entered a new chapter of uncertainty. Staff scrambled to respond to press inquiries, offering no comment, while insiders scrambled to understand the real motive. But those close to the monarchy's emotional pulse knew the truth had been building for years. Ever since the early days when Catherine, young and gracious, had been urged to defer, to accommodate, to hold her tongue. She had watched as decisions were made above her head, as alliances formed that excluded her, as Camilla's image rose steadily in rank and reverence. This portrait wasn't just art, it was a statement, and now its removal had become one too. But this wasn't just about a frame on the wall, this was the eruption of years of quiet power struggles, finally cracking open. They were once expected to stand side by side, symbols of a united monarchy. But behind palace walls, the divide between Catherine and Camilla grew wider with every passing month. Unspoken glances, frosty silences, and calculated moves told a story no portrait could conceal. The friction didn't begin with grand gestures or explosive moments, it crept in slowly, like cold air through a cracked window. At first, it was subtle. A quiet pause during a joint walkabout, a brief glance during a ceremonial exchange, but for those attuned to royal dynamics, the signs were unmistakable. Catherine and Camilla, while smiling for the cameras, were already drifting apart behind them. Their visions for the monarchy were not merely different, they were oppositional. Camilla, the product of decades of palace intrigue and restoration, embodied tradition forged in fire and scandal. Catherine, on the other hand, was the people's future, an embodiment of grace, empathy, and quiet resolve. The public saw warmth in Catherine. They saw humanity, and more importantly, they saw echoes of Diana. For some, this was healing. For others, it was threatening. Behind closed doors, ceremonial seating arrangements became battlegrounds. Royal watchers noted how, at more than one official engagement, Catherine was placed conspicuously at a distance close enough to appear respectful, far enough to make a point. Sources within palace staff whispered about Camilla's subtle efforts to control optics, influence guest lists, and oversee protocols that strategically limited Catherine's visibility. Each of these moments was dismissed publicly as coincidence, but inside, they told a tale of territorialism, a struggle not just for image, but for power. Catherine's growing popularity only intensified the discomfort. Polls consistently placed her among the most beloved royals, while Camilla's favourability remained lukewarm. And with each surge in Catherine's reputation, another crack formed in the palace's fragile unity. Those who had served Queen Elizabeth could sense the shift. The late monarch had been quietly fond of Catherine, her work ethic, her humility, her refusal to engage in drama. Staff remembered the way Elizabeth had taken her under wing in early years, often remarking on her composure. That legacy lingered in the palace halls, becoming its own quiet form of loyalty. A new kind of division emerged not just between the women, but among those who served them. Aides, courtiers, and advisors now found themselves aligned, consciously or not, with one or the other. And the consequences of these subtle allegiances began to ripple through decision-making, scheduling, and representation. The story the public was fed remained pristine: two queens in waiting, bound by duty. But the real narrative was raw, layered, and unraveling behind the scenes, because while photographs captured poise, they never revealed the glances exchanged once the flashes stopped. They didn't catch the clipped tone in briefings, the closed-door strategy sessions, or the silence that grew louder between every shared engagement. It was no longer about the throne, it was about identity, legacy, and who would truly shape the soul of the next monarchy. And while the public only saw polished appearances, behind closed doors, a much more personal wound was reopening. Her name was never spoken in those meetings, but her shadow lingered in every room. Princess Diana's legacy continues to echo through Catherine's every move. And now, with Camilla's portrait under scrutiny, the ghost of past betrayals returned with piercing force. The moment Catherine quietly ordered the removal of Camilla's portrait, it sent shivers through the corridors of the palace. Not because of the act itself, but because of what it represented, a reckoning with history that had long been suppressed. For William and Catherine, Diana's memory is not just a private ache. It's a compass, a warning, and a promise. And for Camilla, it remains the unhealed scar on her public image, one that no coronation, no crown, and no title could erase. Diana's story, and the pain it left behind, is interwoven into the very foundation of their marriage. Every decision they make is haunted by what she endured and what she never got to become. Behind palace walls, aides whisper of the box Catherine keeps locked, containing Diana's letters, written not to the public but to her sons. Words never meant for public consumption. Words of protection, caution, and love. Catherine has reportedly read them in moments of doubt, moments when she felt the machinery of the monarchy turning too hard against her. In one such moment, sources claim Catherine said quietly to a trusted aide, "Diana wasn't just lost, she was silenced. That won't happen again." And so, every choice since then, no matter how quiet or symbolic, has carried that burden, including this one. To the public, the comparisons between Diana and Catherine have only intensified. From her fashion to her compassion, Catherine is seen as the spiritual continuation of the woman who captured the world's heart. But within the palace, this connection is more than aesthetic, it's political, it's psychological, and for Camilla, the tension is personal. Whenever Diana's name is invoked in speeches, tributes, or commemorations, Camilla's composure reportedly tightens. She does not contest it outwardly, but those around her describe an air of discomfort that never quite fades. To her, Diana's legacy is the reminder that public forgiveness does not always equate to acceptance. This is why the portrait's removal struck a nerve beyond protocol. It wasn't just a change in decor, it was Catherine reasserting the memory of a woman who had once been erased in palace halls. It was Catherine ensuring that Diana's image, though absent, still defined the emotional architecture of the royal family. And to some insiders, it felt like spiritual rebalancing, a way to symbolically correct a wrong that had lingered too long on the wall beside Queen Elizabeth's image. It wasn't just personal, it was justice. But Catherine's decision wasn't just about grief, it was a calculated move in a game of royal survival. Inside the palace, perception is power, and no one understands that better than Camilla. The Queen Consort's team had long managed her rehabilitation in the public eye. But Catherine's rising star had begun to undo years of careful work. And then came the portrait. What began as a subtle act of quiet authority by Catherine quickly evolved into a firestorm that no press strategy could contain. The removal order hadn't been expected. It hadn't been whispered through usual royal channels or run through crisis control teams. It was delivered with finality, calculated and clean. Camilla's media handlers, seasoned professionals in navigating treacherous waters, were blindsided. Within hours of the news quietly leaking to the public, social media erupted. But not in the way the Queen Consort's allies had hoped. Instead of outrage or confusion, a tidal wave of support began surging toward Catherine. Hashtags declaring allegiance to the Princess of Wales began trending, with users praising her quiet dignity, her loyalty to legacy, and her subtle yet symbolic assertion of values that many believed the monarchy had strayed from. Camilla's team, watching this unfold in real time, scrambled. Internally, schedules were rewritten. Public appearances were rearranged to soften her image. More charity work, more maternal moments, and more references to stability and duty. But behind closed doors, the mood was far from composed. Camilla reportedly demanded answers from senior aides. How had they not seen this coming? Why hadn't Catherine been intercepted? But there were no answers, only the realization that Catherine had moved decisively, without hesitation, and without needing approval. Charles, drawn into the chaos reluctantly, is said to have called a private meeting with senior members from both camps. His tone, uncharacteristically blunt, reportedly echoed down the corridor. Cool the temperature. He knew the cost of internal rifts leaking into public view. But the damage had already been done not just to perception, but to control. In that moment, Catherine didn't flinch. According to palace sources, she remained composed and unmoved. The decision, she calmly stated, was not about personalities but principles. She would not reverse it. She would not explain it. And she certainly would not apologize for it. What followed was a noticeable shift in the public tone. Opinion writers began framing the moment not as a petty feud but as a battle of symbolism. The future queen defends legacy, one headline read, while another asked, "Is this the dawn of a different monarchy?" The questions weren't just rhetorical. They were signals. Catherine was now commanding the narrative and doing so with a poise that only deepened her public appeal. The portrait was gone, but its absence was louder than its presence ever had been. But even as press officers scrambled to manage the fallout, another shockwave was building from within the royal household itself. It started with a whisper from an anonymous palace staffer someone had questioned Camilla's placement in the royal gallery years ago. Now, that whisper had returned, echoing louder than ever as curators began reviewing archival decisions. At first, it seemed like coincidence, a quiet administrative note about curatorial review. A locked wing of the palace labelled temporarily closed for refurbishment. But inside those sealed rooms, a different truth was unfolding. A team had been assembled, curators, archivists, and senior aides, not to rearrange lighting or restore paintings, but to revisit the decisions that had once placed Camilla's portrait so close to Queen Elizabeth's. It wasn't just about art, it was about legacy and the integrity of the visual narrative the monarchy presented to the world. And behind the formal language of artistic rotation was a darker implication. Had Camilla's portrait ever truly belonged there? What followed was a series of discoveries that stirred the already boiling waters. According to internal whispers, documents resurfaced that revealed Queen Elizabeth may never have explicitly approved the portrait's permanent placement. Aides had long cited protocol and ongoing transition, but no formal endorsement from the late monarch could be found. Then came something more explosive, a letter, buried deep in the family archives, bearing the unmistakable signature of Princess Anne. Though unconfirmed, the The content of the letter was said to question Camilla's prominence in royal visual representation. The tone? Direct. And the timing? Months before Queen Elizabeth's final year, suggesting a lingering concern over image, tradition, and hierarchy. As the portrait remained absent and speculation intensified, one voice, powerful and unflinching, quietly broke the silence. Princess Anne. In a rare moment of alignment with her niece-in-law, she reportedly voiced her support for Catherine's decision, calling it long overdue and noting that some walls deserve to breathe before they are smothered by revision. The statement, allegedly passed through trusted aides, wasn't a public declaration, but within the palace, it roared like thunder. Her stance gave weight to what many already suspected. This was never just about art. It was about correcting a quiet imbalance that had sat too comfortably for too long. Meanwhile, King Charles found himself caught in a tightening grip. His advisors urged him to speak, defend Camilla, clarify the intent behind the gallery's design. But he remained silent. The same silence that once protected peace now fueled doubt. That silence, many believed, was a choice, a refusal to stir a battle he could no longer control. And so, behind the sealed gallery doors, decisions were being made. Not by decree, but by momentum. History was being rewritten, not erased, but rebalanced. And just as the dust was settling on the portrait's absence, an unexpected ally emerged from the shadows, changing everything. She didn't say much, but she didn't have to. Princess Anne, long revered for her no-nonsense loyalty to the crown, quietly threw her weight behind Catherine's choice. And with that, the balance of power within the palace began to shift. For years, Princess Anne had remained steadfastly neutral, her energy focused on duty, not drama. But the tides had turned. At a recent state dinner, guests observed a quiet but pointed moment. Anne and Catherine, heads close in conversation, with expressions unreadable yet unmistakably aligned. It wasn't a public endorsement. It didn't need to be. In a world where words are measured in consequence, silence itself can roar. The next day, senior aides noted that Anne's official schedule had subtly begun mirroring Catherine's. They were appearing more frequently at the same engagements, walking side by side, their names increasingly paired in internal briefings. No public announcement was made, but within palace walls, the message was received loud and clear. Anne was no longer sitting on the fence. Whispers from within the royal corridors hinted that this newfound alliance wasn't entirely new. Years ago, Anne was said to have clashed with Camilla over matters of protocol, particularly during engagements where Anne, by rank and seniority, was allegedly made to wait. Those tensions, though discreetly managed, were never fully extinguished. Now, with Camilla's portrait removed and the monarchy's image under re-evaluation, it appeared that Anne had chosen her side not out of rebellion, but out of principle. To her, tradition must serve truth, not ego. The public was quick to notice. A joint appearance between Anne and Catherine at a military commemoration was dissected frame by frame online. No hand-holding, no grand gestures. But their mutual presence spoke volumes. In Catherine, the Princess Royal saw a reflection of unwavering commitment, a woman who didn't need to speak over others to be heard. And in Anne, Catherine found the quiet force of a royal who had survived decades of internal storms. Their shared history, both as daughters-in-law navigating complex hierarchies, both having been underestimated in their own ways, formed a bond stronger than palace politics. Staffers close to the Wales household noticed something different in Catherine after Anne's subtle alignment. Her demeanour, already graceful, took on a quiet steel. Decisions that once required cautious review were now delivered with quiet certainty. Meetings ran tighter. Her presence felt more deliberate. One aide, speaking anonymously, described her as unshakable. Not arrogant, not emotional, just resolved. The kind of resolve that doesn't flinch under pressure but rises from it. But such solidarity never comes without a cost. Behind closed doors, eyes turned to the king. What had once been a private disagreement was now a visible fracture, and as the palace attempted to maintain composure under increasing scrutiny, it became clear that Charles was growing weary. The crown on his head was steady, but the foundation beneath it was trembling, and the move he made next would rattle the very halls of the monarchy. Because solidarity came with a price, because behind closed doors, the king was growing weary, and his next move would shock everyone. For weeks, he said nothing. But when the royal portrait order became a national conversation, King Charles finally stepped forward, not with a statement, but with a subtle move that signaled he had taken a side, and it wasn't the one many expected. The tension had been simmering behind closed doors, but the moment the portrait's removal ignited headlines across the country, silence was no longer an option. King Charles, who had long prided himself on keeping the monarchy composed under pressure, made a move that stunned even his closest advisors. A high-profile engagement with Princess Catherine, scheduled weeks in advance, was abruptly cancelled. No reason given, no public explanation. But insiders say the timing was deliberate. The optics were undeniable. And within palace walls, the silence spoke volumes. What followed next only deepened the rift. Camilla, until now operating in a relatively restrained public role, suddenly ramped up her visibility. Solo appearances in traditionally Wales-aligned territories, speeches delivered with renewed personal emphasis, and charity visits that previously might have been assigned jointly were now branded under her individual banner. This wasn't coincidence, it was calculation. While the world debated loyalty and legacy, Camilla was repositioning herself in real time, reclaiming ground she feared slipping from under her. But it was within the family that the real storm brewed. The bond between father and son, once fragile but preserved, began to fray in real, visible ways. William, always careful to maintain discretion in public, was spotted leaving Clarence House after a meeting with the king. And according to a source close to the household, his parting words were simple but chilling. So be it. It was the kind of remark that suggests not a disagreement, but a line being drawn. Behind palace walls, aides scrambled. One described the atmosphere as controlled chaos. Another, more candidly, said, "Trust is hanging by threads." The once unified royal calendar, meticulously planned to project cohesion, now resembled a chessboard of rival moves. Every appearance was scrutinized, every absence questioned. The old order, an unspoken balance between the crown, the consort, and the heir, was cracking. And Charles, despite his title, seemed to be grasping for control rather than commanding it. The public, too, began to notice. Online forums, tabloid headlines, even primetime interviews with royal commentators all began circling the same question. Could Charles still hold the family together? Or had he, in trying to preserve tradition, alienated the very future of the monarchy? The silence that once protected the royal mystique was now being pierced by doubts, questions, and betrayals that could no longer be buried. But while Charles took to quiet defense, trying to contain the flames without fanning them, Catherine was not retreating. She was planning, and her next move would not require words, confrontation, or even announcement. It would be delivered with the kind of silence that echoed louder than any proclamation, because while the king played defense, Catherine prepared to deliver a final, silent blow that no one could undo. The walls of the palace tell a story, and Catherine was ready to rewrite it. In a quiet but deeply symbolic moment, a new portrait took Camilla's place. But this wasn't about replacing an image, it was about reclaiming a legacy that never truly left. There were no trumpets, no grand declarations, just a still, almost reverent atmosphere, as the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II was returned to the space once claimed by Camilla. The corridor that had grown strangely cold in the eyes of many suddenly felt familiar again, dignified. It wasn't merely a rearrangement of paintings. It was a statement of loyalty, of remembrance, and of values that Catherine believed had been quietly eroded. The portrait, long kept in a private collection, had been restored under Catherine's careful direction, its placement chosen with precision. She didn't need to explain her choice. The message was clear. The memory of the Queen was not a chapter to be closed, but a standard to uphold. And it didn't stop there. A special dedication followed, intimate, selective, but profoundly powerful. Catherine hosted the event herself, drawing together members of the royal household, selected press, and a few of Queen Elizabeth's closest former aides. No speeches were broadcast live, no soundbites prepared in advance. But what did circulate was a single image. William, standing beside the restored portrait, head bowed. Observers noted his glassy eyes. Some said it was pride, others said it was pain. Perhaps it was both the weight of legacy pressing on the shoulders of the future king. Media headlines erupted. "A restoration of the people's monarchy," one declared. Another simply wrote, "She's back." For the public, the message resonated. In a time of internal rifts and uncertain leadership, Catherine's act seemed to restore a sense of emotional gravity, anchoring the crown not in controversy, but in continuity. It was the kind of quiet power move that didn't need palace press officers to explain. It echoed through the halls, whispered through the crowd, and landed with absolute clarity in the court of public opinion. Notably, Camilla was absent. No statement given, no appearance scheduled. For the first time in years, she did not attend a dedication tied to the palace's public image. And within the royal inner circle, that absence was louder than any comment. Senior aides, once hesitant, now openly aligned themselves behind Catherine's vision. Even those who had worked closely with Camilla began redirecting their loyalties. It wasn't rebellion, it was realignment. The Queen's memory had returned to its rightful place, and with it came a quiet restoration of order. The palace began speaking a different language, one of tradition, of duty, of unity. Press briefings took on a new tone, filled with subtle nods to Queen Elizabeth's enduring influence. Even King Charles, once strained in his silence, began referencing his mother more frequently in official communications. It was as if Catherine's decision had pulled the monarchy back from a ledge it didn't even realize it was teetering on. But just as the storm appeared to settle, just as the family seemed to find its footing again, the calm was shattered, because while the portrait had been replaced and the narrative reclaimed, one final twist remained, a revelation that threatened to redefine everything yet again. Just when the royal family thought the storm had passed, an internal memo leaked. Time-stamped just 1 minute before the portrait was removed, it revealed something unthinkable. The decision had been triggered by a private message. Not from Catherine, but from someone long thought silent. The memo was never meant to surface. Marked for internal eyes only, it carried the weight of a monarch's final wish, a sealed letter penned by Queen Elizabeth herself, dated months before her passing. And in it, the late Queen reportedly expressed concern about the optics of Camilla's portrait standing alongside hers. The tone, sources say, was not harsh, but reflective. She had built a monarchy on symbols, on placements, on the power of perception. And this was one she feared might confuse rather than comfort future generations. The letter never named Catherine directly, but it named the space, the corridor, the gallery, and it requested that discretion be exercised when choosing what faces would guard its history. When the truth broke, the effect was seismic. The narrative flipped overnight. Catherine had not acted out of rivalry or emotion, but out of reverence. She had upheld the final whispered sentiment of a queen she deeply admired. And suddenly, her silence, her restraint, her dignity through the chaos all made sense. William, once rumoured to be at odds with his father over the incident, reportedly confirmed the Queen's letter to his closest aides. This was never about Camilla, he is said to have explained quietly. It was about honouring my grandmother. The news spread like wildfire, and with it came a public swell of emotion. Sympathy turned into admiration, debates turned into applause. She defended the Queen's legacy. Read one headline, "A true future monarch," declared another. Even those previously skeptical of Catherine's boldness saw the removal of Camilla's portrait not as an attack but as an act of loyalty. A loyal daughter-in-law fulfilling a sacred trust. A future queen shaping her role with courage, not convenience. And for Camilla, the revelation stung. There was no rebuttal she could issue, no counter-narrative strong enough to drown out the late Queen's own voice. She retreated from view for several weeks, her schedule noticeably thinned. The palace made no official comment, but insiders whispered of hushed conversations, unspoken reconciliations, and a new reality that had settled like morning fog across Buckingham's gilded corridors. The shift was undeniable. With Queen Elizabeth's final words now a compass, the royal family found itself charting a new direction, one rooted not in modern manoeuvring, but in timeless duty. Catherine's influence, once quietly felt, now rang like a bell across the monarchy's foundations. Her decisions would no longer be second-guessed. She had stepped forward not just as a wife or mother, but as a sovereign in waiting, wielding quiet power with devastating clarity. And with one act of quiet defiance, Catherine didn't just remove a portrait, she reignited the soul of a monarchy long at war with itself. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.